My father left me a house when he died, but my mom kicked me out to live there with her new family. I'm 24 years old. Let me start by saying that my mother kicked me out of the house just to impress her new husband. Well, if kicked out sounds too harsh, let's say she forced me to leave my own home and sent me to live with my grandparents on my father's side. All my best childhood memories are tied to the time when my dad was still alive. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was just 7. I was devastated. I had been incredibly close to him, and saying goodbye at his funeral shattered me. Even now, I can still see that moment clearly. It still hurts. While I was trying to cope with my loss, my mother brought another man into our lives and insisted that I call him Dad. Yeah, no chance in hell. I don't know if I was right or wrong, but it just didn't feel right. Just a few months after my father's death, I saw this man in my mother's bedroom, and I couldn't wrap my head around how quickly she had moved on. She didn't even wait a year before replacing my father. I wasn't ready to accept him. And just as I turned 8, they threw themselves a grand wedding. Considering it was a second marriage for both, they went all out. Not that it was any of my business. What was my business, though, was that my mother left me with my grandparents and jetted off on her honeymoon. A month passed, then another, and another. She never came back for me. I kept asking my grandparents when my mom would come get me, but they had no answers. Then, one day, she finally showed up. I was so happy to see her. After all that time. I ran up to hug her, but she had come to drop off all my stuff. That moment broke me. I ended up living with my grandparents until high school, and honestly, I was happy with them. My mother would visit from time to time, only to remind me how much she loved and cared for me. Occasionally, I asked her, "If you love me so much, why did you leave me here?" She had no answer. Instead, she made excuses like, "Oh, your grandparents are getting older. They need help with groceries and taking out the trash." Eventually, though, she admitted the truth. She had given my room to her new stepkids, the 2 children of her husband, who moved in after their marriage. My mother had chosen her new family over me. Naturally, I resented her for it. Over time, I stopped trying to keep in touch. After high school, I moved out of my grandparents' house but still visited them often. They were my true saviors. They raised me. Without them, my childhood would have been completely ruined. Now, at 24, after working in marketing for a year, I decided to start my own business. But for that, I needed startup capital. So, I came up with a solution. I would rent out my house. Oh yeah, surprise! If I haven't mentioned it yet, here's a little shocker for my mother and her new family. The house they live in belongs to me. That's right. My father made sure his will was airtight before his death, leaving everything including the house to me. I was just a kid when his lawyer read the will at the funeral, but I could tell from my mother's face that she wasn't happy about it. Later, I learned that she had tried multiple times to contest it but failed every single time. My father had planned everything too well. The house was legally mine, but I couldn't sell it until I turned 22. Until then, no one could claim ownership over it. My grandparents believe my father saw this coming, which is why he made the will so strict. Otherwise, my mother could have manipulated me into signing it over to her when I was a kid. Last month, I tried calling my mother to tell her about my plan to rent out the house, but she ignored all my calls. This week, while visiting my grandparents, I casually mentioned that I was about to make some money off the house. Their reaction was odd. I asked what was wrong, and they hesitated before telling me that I might face some resistance trying to get my house back. Apparently, my stepsister is pregnant by some loser who bailed on her, and her brother lost his full-time job and is now stuck working night shifts at a store. Basically, they're struggling financially. And now, I don't know what the hell to do. I need the house too. I quit my job, and I need the capital to start my business. Update 1. Things got dramatic real fast. As I said, my grandparents warned me that my mother and her family might not be willing to leave the house given their situation. I decided to give my mother a heads up about my plans and offer them a few months to move out. At first, I was going to give them a 1-month notice, but after learning about their struggles, I decided to give them 3 to 4 months instead. Since my mother wasn't answering my calls, I decided to go to her house. Or, well, what used to be my house. It looked nothing like I remembered, and honestly, neither did she. There was something cold about her, like she already knew why I was there. When she saw me at the door, she forced a fake smile and gave me the most insincere hug imaginable. Mind you, we hadn't seen each other in almost a decade. Yeah, she stopped visiting me when I hit my teenage years, and I resented her for it. How could I not? And even after all these years, she didn't even ask how I was doing. Not a single, "How have you been?" It was like she didn't care at all. Her whole attitude screamed, "Oh, it's you. You must want something." I played along. "Oh no, nothing important. Just thought I'd check on you after all this time," I said. She gave me a half-hearted smile. "Yeah, it really has been a while." And then silence. A painfully awkward 5-minute silence. I couldn't take it anymore, so I got up to leave. I didn't feel welcome at all. It wasn't just her at the house either. My pregnant stepsister was there too, and she looked at me like I had shown up just to cause trouble. At that moment, I dropped the idea of reclaiming my house. I figured I'd just find another way to get the money I needed for my business. But then my mother did something that completely shattered any remaining tolerance I had for her. Last week was the 15th anniversary of my father's death. My grandparents held a small prayer service at the church, and since I was in town, I decided to organize something bigger, feeding the poor and giving gifts to underprivileged kids. I invited friends, family, and even sent my mother an email. She never replied. When I checked, I realized she didn't even bother opening it. It was the first email I had ever sent her, so I thought maybe it went to spam or something. So I went to her house again. This time, she wasn't home. Her ever-so-charming daughter, Brenda, opened the door. No greetings, no pleasantries, just a straight-up, "You again? What do you want?" I told her I was there to see my mother. She scoffed. "After the last time she spoke to you, do you really think she wants to see you again?" Her tone was so vicious that I had to take a second to even process what she just said. Then I told her I came to invite my mother to a prayer ceremony in memory of my father. Brenda laughed, right in my face. "That was like 100 years ago. Move on already." I clenched my jaw. "Excuse me? That was my father. It's not your place to comment." She rolled her eyes and walked off like she hadn't just spit on my grief. I sat on the porch for a few minutes, feeling like an idiot, before leaving a note for my mother, asking her to call me. Surprisingly, she did. The next day, I explained about the ceremony. She was silent for a moment before saying she couldn't make it because she had to take Brenda to a checkup. That pissed me off. Not because she had plans, but because she could have at least pretended she cared. She didn't even say she'd try to come, just a straight-up no. So, yeah, I got sarcastic. "Of course, they're your priority. We don't mean shit to you, whatever. Good luck raising that narcissistic brat and her parasite." She exploded. "I didn't care. Why should I be polite to someone who had been nothing but cruel to me?" Brenda literally mocked my father's death, and my mother had the audacity to defend her. She was upset. "You shouldn't talk about the dead around a pregnant woman." I laughed bitterly. "And you shouldn't talk shit about my father. But here you are." Then she said it. "Your father died 15 years ago. Get over it already." That was it. "Oh? Like you did? What was it? 2 weeks? Maybe a few days? Who knows?" I snapped. "You know what? You don't need to come. My father wouldn't have wanted your prayers anyway, not after seeing your true colors." And I hung up. That same day, I hired a lawyer to start the eviction process. It took him about 2 weeks to confirm my father's will and send the official notice. As expected, my mother was furious. I got a voice message full of rage, accusations, and insults. I laughed, then blocked her. Since she couldn't reach me, she went crying to my grandparents instead. I wasn't there at the time, yeah, I'm staying with them again while I sort out my life. She begged them to talk me out of it. My grandparents, being the kind and patient people they are, didn't throw her out. They just told her the truth. It's his house. He can do whatever he wants with it. Simple. Fair. Logical. She hated that answer. So she lashed out at them, saying they had spoiled me and turned me into an ungrateful brat. Seriously? I asked my grandmother why she didn't just tell her off. She sighed. "Because nothing I say would change her mind." Well, lucky for her, nothing she says will change mine either. They're getting the hell out of my house. And not a day later than legally required. I sent the eviction notice according to tenant laws in my country. Though, let's be real, these people weren't tenants. They weren't paying me rent. In fact, I was the one paying property taxes every damn year. Legally, I could have thrown them out any time I wanted, right that second if I felt like it. But my grandparents, being the kind and God-fearing people they are, ask me to wait. For the love of God, my grandfather said, at least give them this month to find another place. The girl is pregnant, we can't throw her onto the streets. I sighed. She doesn't need any help. She's just as toxic as my mother. My grandmother shook her head. Perhaps she is, but that unborn child isn't. Don't be cruel to an innocent soul. And somehow, they got through to me. I agreed to wait, even though I had been ready to kick them out that same day. The next day, my mother called. I ignored it. After all, she did the same when I tried calling her. Then she texted, "We need to talk. It's urgent." I replied, "Check my schedule and meet me at my grandparents' house when I'm free." She did not like that. She sent me a long, angry message, accusing me of power tripping and trying to control her. I didn't even bother responding. Maybe she finally understood I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. Growing up, every time I cried or begged to go home, she didn't comfort me. She didn't hold me. She didn't even pretend to care. She just scolded me, told me to behave, to stop embarrassing her. Fear was her parenting method, and for a long time, it worked. I learned to stay silent, to be good, to suppress everything. But things had changed. Now she was the one left waiting, and now she was the one who had to live with the consequences. She showed up at my grandparents' house. I made her wait an hour. She was livid, kept asking my grandparents where I was. They just shrugged, said they didn't know, and then quietly disappeared into their room. When I finally walked in, she gave me a look that screamed, "Where the hell have you been? I've been waiting." But she didn't say it out loud. Instead, she sat down, face like stone. Someone in her position might have tried to soften me up, maybe play the loving mother card. Not her. She was still trying to act like she had the upper hand. "All right, let's get to the point," she said. "I can't sit here all day. I have things to do." I smirked. "Of course. Finding a new home is so time-consuming." She glared at me. "What the hell is this eviction notice?" I shrugged. "It's in English. I'm sure you can read it. Or would you like me to read it out loud for you?" That set her off. She threw the papers in my face. "I'm not leaving this house over some stupid notice," she snapped. I waited for her to finish yelling. Then calmly I said, "Well then, let's see what happens when you ignore a court order." Her face turned red. "I gave birth to you. You don't get to be smarter than me. That house belongs to my husband, and no one can throw us out." I leaned back, smiled. "Well, the legal heir can." She was fuming, and honestly, I was enjoying it. But then she said something that finally broke my patience. She called my father her husband. "Your husband?" I snapped. "You mean the man whose memorial service you skipped because, in your words, he's in the past? You don't deserve his house. You're nothing but squatters. And I will clear that house of every last leech." She stood up. "I've been nice to you, but now you'll deal with my lawyer." I laughed. "Please, you've got 20 days. Let's see what you can pull off." Update 2. After a long, exhausting fight, I finally got my house back. Like I said before, I gave my mother and her family a 30-day eviction notice. She tried her usual manipulation tactics, but I shut that down fast. She left, fuming. And that's when things really got crazy. Her precious stepdaughter Brenda decided to go full psycho on me. She lunged at me, screaming, accusing me of harassing a pregnant woman. And then, just for good measure, she threatened to file a police report against me for sexual harassment. Yeah, she really tried that move. Apparently, in her head, pregnancy meant she could do whatever she wanted with zero consequences. I didn't even flinch. "Lady, being pregnant doesn't make you immune to reality. If you pull this stunt again, I'll have you arrested." She tried running to my grandparents for sympathy, but lucky for me there were security cameras all around the house. I played the footage, showed her exactly how this would go if she took things further. "If you show up here again," I said, "you will go to jail." After that, guess who showed up next? Yep, my mother. She came in, guns blazing, accusing me of bullying and emotionally abusing poor pregnant Brenda. And wait for it, she threatened to sue me. I smirked. "Perfect. Let's take this to court. I'd love to see what the judge thinks after watching the security footage." That shut her up real quick. And when she realized she wasn't going to win with threats, she changed tactics. She started crying. She sobbed, wailing about how she failed as a mother, how she raised such a selfish and ungrateful child. And then get this, she dragged my dead father into it. She actually said, "It's his fault. He died too soon and left you without the proper upbringing." At that point, I knew. There was no getting through to her. There was no reasoning, no redemption arc. So, I walked away. 20 days later, they were gone. And I finally had my house back. I responded, "Hold on. If anyone is to blame here, it's you. Not for raising me poorly because you didn't raise me at all. My grandparents did, and they did a damn good job. You should be apologizing for abandoning me. But you know what? I'm actually glad you didn't raise me. Seeing what you did with your stepdaughter, I realize I dodged a bullet." I told her I wasn't interested in more conversations. I just wanted my property back. I had let them live there for free for years, and now I actually needed the house. I even tried explaining my situation, how I had quit my job and needed money to start my business, which is why I planned to rent it out. That set her off. "You're kicking us out just to let strangers live here?" she screamed. I shrugged. "Strangers will pay rent. If you're willing to pay, you can stay." She lost it. Accused me of tearing the family apart. I laughed. "What family? You threw me out like trash and barely acknowledged my existence. My birthdays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, you never showed up. And when you did visit, you made me feel like I should be grateful for your presence. What kind of mother does that? A mother like you, that's who." She tried everything: manipulation, gaslighting, guilt-tripping, even her classic screaming fits. But when she saw I wasn't budging, she finally left. You'd think that'd be the end of it, right? That they'd pack up and leave? Oh, no. Her sorry excuse of a husband decided he needed to get involved. I got a lovely voicemail from him. "Dude, you have no idea who you're messing with. I could pick you up like a dumbbell and make you beg for mercy. One punch to the face, and you'll forget all about this house. Show up here again, and I'll knock you the fuck out." Big guy. Loves to talk tough. I barely knew anything about him, but my grandparents had warned me not to get into it with him. Said he was aggressive, a thug, but also dumb as a brick. Which worked out in my favor because the idiot gave me evidence by threatening me in a voicemail. I didn't respond. I let the police handle it. On eviction day, I walked into the police station and filed a report against him for threats of violence. I had proof, his own words. My lawyer came with me and requested a police escort for the eviction. When we arrived at my house, my mother, Bill, her loser husband, and Brenda were already outside screaming at us. Bill even stepped out with a hockey stick like he was about to do something. But the second he saw a police car pull up behind us, suddenly he wasn't so tough anymore. The officers handed them the eviction notice and told them to vacate the house. These clowns were so sure they could bully me into backing down that they hadn't even started packing. They begged the cops for another month. The officers turned to me. I shook my head. Not after all the threats. Then they pulled out their last trick, the pregnancy excuse. "But Brenda is pregnant. Can't we get just a few more days?" I refused. At that point, even the cops were looking at me like I was being harsh. But I didn't care. I was following the law to the letter. They had no right to be in that house. They kept trying to bargain. "Just one more day." I folded my arms. "You've got 3 hours." The bitterness on their faces was priceless. Bill even tried to shoulder check me on his way past, glaring like he was about to do something. The cops immediately stepped in. "Pack your stuff. Now." That was it. They were out. The police took my house keys and told me I could pick them up at the station. My lawyer advised me to file a restraining order against them just in case they tried to come back and harass me or my future tenants. I agreed. The officers handed them a copy of the court order and explained the legal consequences of violating it. The look of pure defeat on their faces was beautiful. And just like that, the house was finally mine again. I put it up for rent immediately. Hopefully, I'll secure a good deal soon and finally launch my business. I've wasted enough time dealing with these morons. This will probably be my last update. Unless, of course, this disaster of a family decides to pull some more bullshit. Thanks for reading. And for the support. Okay. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts on the main character and his mom's behavior.